All right, we're back with part 7 of the deployment miniseries, and every time we make one of these, the Death Watch lose a little bit of their rules. Let's keep going.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so we're going to talk about move blocking. Move blocking can be done on both sides. It's a fairly generic term. We're going to start with self-move blocking. We've been talking about deployment, and I know I've mentioned this a little bit earlier in one of the previous videos, but self-move blocking as a part of your deployment is a giant problem if you do it, because it doesn't just affect your turn one. If you misdeploy and you move block yourself so you can't get out of your deployment zone turn one, not only does that affect the whole rest of the game, right? Because turn one is when you have your maximum firepower. If you don't get that on turn one to try to like even out the playing field after your opponent shoots at you or whatever else, you're letting them have more firepower on their turn two that they wouldn't have had otherwise, which means you lose even more on turn two than you would have lost had you not move blocked yourself. Furthermore, contesting objectives in the center. If your opponent's standing on circles turn one and you move yourself or move block yourself to where you can't even contest the objective on turn one, you're just literally handing them free points. So there's a bunch of ways that this mostly comes when it comes to giant footprint units like big 20-man plus bricks. It also comes to large vehicles. When you are moving through other units, friendly units specifically, you can move through them kind of like they're not there, except for vehicles and monsters. Well, even though I could totally move through this brick of boys, the short answer is if the boys aren't fast enough because they didn't advance this turn or whatever else, they may still very well move block me, because while I can walk through them, I can't land on them. So
right,
if I've got a full brick of 20 dudes that are just in the way, it doesn't matter that I have an 8-inch move on my dreadnought. I'm only getting to move like the 5 inches that they moved.
Well, and your
because
base,
I can't land in the middle of the unit.
The front of the base to the back of your base is like 4 inches or something.
Yeah.
So it's because you have to get all the way over them from one side to the other. It's almost like you're only moving 4. Or you need to move whatever you need to move plus 4.
Yeah, in order to fully clear the unit. That's more accurate. Yeah. When it comes to move blocking, this also has a lot to do with ruins. Infantry can walk through walls, and while that's great, so that they're not move blocked, if your infantry are using the open lane instead of walking through walls, you are limiting the spaces where your vehicles can go. Obviously, you want to protect your vehicles for the most part. You don't want them super exposed because they're usually more expensive units. But as much as that's true, again, you gotta keep in mind that your vehicle can't walk through a wall. Your infantry, as far as they're concerned, they can walk wherever they want. They have the whole deployment line that they can be placed. But vehicles don't. They want to stay protected, but they also need to think about how hard is it going to be to get around this building. If I lock myself in this back corner and it takes me 2 turns to get onto the other side, it's basically like I didn't have that unit at all for a couple of turns, and that can be pretty rough.
I want to touch on I want to touch on one other thing before we go to the next stuff. Also, bear in mind, if you have vehicles that are transports and you stuff things adjacent to your transport, like on all sides, and your opponent pops that transport and there's stuff inside, you're going to have a bad time, because you have to be able to put those things outside the transport within 3 inches. Or
before you remove the model.
Or was it Desperate Escape or Emergency, whatever? You can go to 6...
Emergency Disembark. Yep.
Yeah, Emergency Disembark. Then you go to 6 inches, but like sometimes that's still not doable, and staying in coherency and whatever. If you're standing, or if you have a truck surrounded by 2 giant 20 blob bricks of boys, you can absolutely make it impossible to place the boys unit that's inside the truck anywhere.
Yep.
And you'll end up, like, at the end of the day, you'll end up losing a ton of models for no reason other than you could have just deployed, like, a little better.
Yep. And this is one of those things that, like, you're speaking from experience, right? Like, you make this mistake once, maybe twice, and then you learn real fast that this feels bad and we don't do that again. But part of these videos is talking about it ahead of time so you don't get caught out. Because the time that happens, like the one game where you're like, I absolutely just threw away a unit because I move blocked myself and I couldn't disembark, or something like that. It's those games that feel bad, and you really remember them because of how big what seems like a small mistake can be.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Okay, so moving on, there's an other side to this. There's a very positive side, in theory, for you to move block your opponent, because in addition to all of these issues that they have during their deployment, they also cannot move through your models of all at any kind unless they have the fly keyword. So even a infiltrating brick of cultists, if you go first, you can infiltrate them up and you can walk closer to their deployment zone, and then you can just stand in front of their deployment line. You don't need to charge, you don't need to shoot, you just need to stand there. And if they don't have the fly keyword, you are hemming them into their deployment zone, which means they can't stand on circles for turn 2 to score primaries. This can be, I don't want to say game winning, but it can be very detrimental to your opponent. And it's not just infiltrates. I use that as an example, but scouts, things like that. This is move blocking is extremely powerful, because I think the most underrated thing when it comes to playing in the current edition is the power to board control. Because almost every mission, every secondary, things like that, very few, if any of them, care about you being in your own deployment zone. They would much rather you be outside your deployment zone in the neutral zone or in your opponent's deployment zone. A lot of the missions now talk about only objectives that are in the neutral zone. So they want you to kind of churn and die and fight in the middle, and that's okay. That's the game right now. But if you get move blocked, or you move block your opponent to where one of you doesn't really get to leave your deployment zone. I was playing Wolves for quite a while, and that was my whole game plan. I had to be fast enough that I made a turn 1 charge and lock them into the deployment zone. I didn't care if I killed anything, because the answer is, as long as I can engage them and be tough enough to stay alive, that's all I needed, man. And now they don't get out of their deployment zone. I'm scoring primary on turn 2. They haven't even gotten out of their deployment zone other than the one jump pack unit that could fly over. Yeah, totally worth it.
I kind of want to dumb it down just a little bit real quick. So the reason, let's say on my turn, I move some stuff to the middle of the table, and I try to move it a little further, so I'm just trying to stop you from getting to the center objective. If I can go 6 inches past the center objective towards you and put a 20-man blob of grots or whatever, they're not powerful. They're just going to stand there, right? The thing is on your turn, because of the sequence of the phases, you can move, and if you don't manage to kill them in shooting and then charge something else to get free movement on the objective, even if you wipe them, you're never getting the objective unless you have some kind of strat that gives you out of sequence movement or something. That is how that works. There's additionally, kind of like we were saying, if you're tough and you're fast, you can just charge them. Now they have to fall back and do something. Or fight you and survive, whatever. But you're betting that that's not going to happen. And even if they do wipe the unit, even if they do kill all those grots, all I'm saying is that they're going to take 1 extra turn to get where they're going. And that's points.
Yep. That is arguably, this is not actually how it works, because you can score a bunch of points, right? But in theory, because you're both fighting over the center and you're both preventing points from your opponent and they're preventing points from you, in theory, you're getting kind of a fairly steady average of points per turn, which culminates in your end total. Now, that's not exactly true, because if you start killing harder than they do, you can score more points at the end and less points at the beginning. But assuming that those spikes are still nominal, if you're scoring I'm going to score 10 points on primary every turn, and I just need to find once or twice where I can spike and get to 15, that way I can get to my cap of 50. That sounds great. Well, what if you're trying to get to 50 primary points because you need to and your opponent says, but you're not allowed to score on turn 2. Well, you went from 4 turns of scoring down to 3. If the mission says max 15 per turn, you already can't get to 50 because they move blocked you one time and you already can't get your cap, period. Yeah. This can be, again, incredibly powerful. Board control is very important in this edition. And that's part of why in the previous video we talked about one of the previous videos, we talked about what do you place into reserves. If you're board controlling hard enough that you're preventing them from, getting to the middle objectives on turn 1, that also means on their turn 2, you're so spread out or you're so protecting of the midfield stuff. Where are they going to deep strike? You've also unintentionally screened them out of like good reserves.
Oh yeah.
Maybe they can get to like your back corner, but at that point, like that's still not a primary. So, good luck with your 3 points on secondaries or something like that.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, it's good to think about. We got a couple more of these coming. Look out for them. Hey everyone, thanks for watching the video. Go ahead and crump the like button. Subscribe if you want to watch more of our stuff. We run a tiny little friendly local game store with an online store too called Go for Games. Where you go for games. Anyway, support us and have fun. Thanks so much.